Sometimes the smallest object in a family carries the biggest secret. I did not understand how true those words were until the night of my mother Eleanor Brooks's 68th birthday. Looking back now, I can still remember every detail with unsettling clarity. The smell of roasted turkey coming from the kitchen, the sound of laughter echoing through the dining room, the soft glow of candles reflected against the windows of my mother's home in Columbus, Ohio. It was supposed to be a simple family celebration. Instead, it became the beginning of a discovery that would change everything I thought I knew about my life. My name is Ryan Brooks. I am the youngest child in the Brooks family. At least, that was what I believed at the time. My mother had spent decades creating a warm and welcoming home for our family. Even after my father passed away several years earlier, she continued hosting every holiday, birthday, and special gathering. No matter how busy life became, everyone always found a reason to come back to her house. That evening was no different. My older sister Claire arrived with her husband and 2 children. My older brother Matthew drove nearly 3 hours to be there. Cousins, nieces, and nephews filled every corner of the house. For most of the night, everything felt perfectly normal. We shared stories, exchanged gifts, and laughed about old family memories. My mother seemed happy, perhaps happier than I had seen her in years. She sat at the center of the dining table smiling as everyone celebrated around her. Then something unexpected happened. After dinner, Claire disappeared upstairs for several minutes. When she returned, she was carrying a small wooden box covered in dust. "Look what I found in the attic," she announced with a grin. Immediately, everyone's attention shifted toward her. My mother looked up from her chair. At first, she seemed merely curious. Then her expression changed. The moment she saw the box, the color seemed to drain from her face. It happened so quickly that most people probably missed it. I did not. "Where exactly did you find that?" my mother asked. Her voice sounded calm, but something underneath it felt different. Claire laughed. "Behind some old storage bins. I almost threw it away." My mother stood up immediately. "Do not do that." The room fell strangely quiet. Claire looked surprised. So did everyone else. My mother rarely reacted strongly to anything. Yet now she was staring at the box as if it contained something dangerous. Claire slowly handed it over. My mother hesitated before opening it. Inside were several old photographs, yellowed letters tied together with a faded ribbon, and a small velvet pouch. For a moment, she simply stared at the contents without speaking. Then she reached for the pouch. Her hands trembled slightly. When she opened it, a gold ring slid into her palm. It was old and worn from years of use. Nothing about it appeared especially valuable. Yet my mother's reaction suggested otherwise. She held it carefully, almost reverently. The room remained silent. Finally, Matthew asked the question everyone was thinking. "Mom, what is it?" My mother looked down at the ring for several seconds before answering. "Just something from a long time ago." The explanation sounded incomplete. Everyone sensed it. My mother quickly closed the pouch and attempted to return it to the box. That should have ended the matter. Instead, curiosity took over. As she moved the ring, it slipped from her fingers and landed on the hardwood floor near my chair. Instinctively, I bent down and picked it up. As I turned it toward the light, I noticed something unusual engraved on the inside band. There was a date. Beneath the date was a name. Not my mother's name. Not my father's name. In fact, it was a name I had never heard before. I looked up. My mother was staring directly at me. For the first time that evening, I saw fear in her eyes. For several seconds, nobody said anything. The cheerful atmosphere that had filled the house only moments earlier seemed to vanish completely. I looked down at the ring again. The engraving was small but clear enough to read. A woman's name was etched beside a date from nearly 36 years earlier. It was not Eleanor Brooks. It was not anyone I recognized from our family. I expected my mother to explain immediately. Instead, she stepped forward and gently took the ring from my hand. "It is late," she said quietly. "We can look through these things another time." Her attempt to change the subject only made everyone more curious. Claire glanced at me. Matthew folded his arms. Even the younger family members sensed something unusual was happening. "Mom," Claire asked carefully, "why are you upset about an old ring?" My mother forced a smile, but it did not reach her eyes. "I am not upset." The answer sounded rehearsed. For the rest of the evening, she avoided further questions. Soon guests began leaving. Conversations resumed, but the warmth that had defined the celebration never fully returned. As I helped clean the kitchen later that night, I noticed my mother standing alone by the living room window. She was holding the ring in her hand. The expression on her face was not anger or frustration. It looked more like sadness. Deep sadness. The kind that comes from carrying something heavy for a very long time. I considered asking her about it then. Instead, I stayed silent. Around 10:30 that evening, I drove home. Yet the image of that ring stayed with me the entire way. The next morning, I could not stop thinking about it. The name engraved inside the band continued replaying in my mind. Why had my mother reacted so strongly? Why had she hidden the box in the attic? Most importantly, why did she look frightened when I read the inscription? By noon, curiosity finally got the better of me. I called Claire. You noticed Mom's reaction too, right? There was a pause. I was wondering when you would call, she replied. That answer told me everything. We met later that afternoon at a coffee shop near downtown Columbus. Claire admitted she had been thinking about the ring constantly. I have never seen Mom act like that, she said. Not even after Dad passed away. I agreed. Something about the situation felt different. We spent nearly an hour discussing possibilities. Maybe the ring belonged to a distant relative. Maybe it came from an old friend. Maybe there was a family story we had never heard. Yet none of those explanations seemed large enough to justify my mother's reaction. Before leaving, Claire mentioned something unexpected. Do you remember that old photograph album Dad always kept in his study? I nodded. There were pictures in there of people I never recognized. The comment stayed with me. Later that week, I visited my mother's house under the pretense of helping with a few repairs. She welcomed me warmly, but I quickly noticed the wooden box was gone. The attic had been reorganized. The storage area where Claire found the box looked completely different. It was obvious someone had moved things. While replacing a faulty light fixture in the hallway, I casually asked about the ring. My mother's shoulders immediately stiffened. There is nothing important about it, she replied. Some memories are better left in the past. Her answer only deepened the mystery. As I prepared to leave, she touched my arm gently. Ryan, she said softly, sometimes knowing everything does not make life easier. I smiled politely, but inside I felt more determined than ever. Because if the ring truly meant nothing, my mother would not be trying so hard to make me forget about it. And for the first time in my life, I began to wonder whether there were parts of our family's story that had never been told. Over the next several days, the questions followed me everywhere. At work, while driving, even lying awake at night, I kept thinking about the ring and the strange fear I had seen in my mother's eyes. The more I tried to dismiss it, the more impossible it became. Eventually, I decided to do something I had never done before. I began looking through old family records. At first, I expected to find nothing. My parents had always been private people, but they were also organized. If there was an explanation, perhaps it existed somewhere among the countless boxes of photographs, letters, and documents collected over decades. The following Saturday, I visited my mother's house again. She had gone to spend the afternoon with a friend from church, which left me alone to help organize several storage shelves in the garage. At least, that was the excuse I gave myself. In reality, I was searching for answers. Most of the boxes contained exactly what I expected. Old tax, records, holiday decorations, family photographs from vacations, and birthdays. Yet after nearly 2 hours, I discovered something unusual. Tucked behind several storage containers was an old photo album I had never seen before. The cover was faded and worn from age. Curious, I opened it. The first several pages showed pictures from years before I was born. My parents appeared younger than I had ever known them. There were photographs from family picnics, church gatherings, and neighborhood events. Then I noticed someone unfamiliar. A young woman appeared repeatedly throughout the album. She stood beside my mother in several photographs. In others, she appeared alone. She looked to be around the same age as my parents. Blonde hair, bright smile, kind eyes. Yet I had absolutely no memory of ever hearing her name. I turned another page. There she was again. Then again. The frequency of her appearance immediately caught my attention. Whoever she was, she had clearly been important to my family at one point. On the back of one photograph, someone had written a name in blue ink. Emily Carter. My pulse quickened slightly. It was the same name engraved inside the ring. I stared at the photograph for several seconds. Suddenly, the mystery no longer felt abstract. Emily Carter had been a real person. A person connected closely enough to my parents to appear throughout an entire photo album. Yet somehow I had never heard her mentioned. Before I could continue searching, I heard the garage door opening. My mother had returned home earlier than expected. Quickly, I placed the album back where I found it. A few moments later, she entered the garage carrying grocery bags. At first, everything seemed normal. Then her eyes drifted toward the shelf where the album had been sitting. Her expression changed instantly. "What have you been doing?" she asked. The question sounded casual, but I sensed something deeper beneath it. "Just organizing a little," I replied. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she slowly placed the groceries on a nearby table. "Ryan," she said softly, "some things belong in the past." There it was again. The same warning. The same attempt to close a door. I had not even fully opened yet. This time, however, I could not let it go. "Who is Emily Carter?" The words escaped before I could stop them. My mother's face froze. Complete silence filled the garage. For a moment, she looked older than her 68 years. Older and somehow tired. She lowered herself into a chair and stared at the floor. "Where did you hear that name?" she asked quietly. I hesitated before answering. "The ring. The photographs." She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, they were filled with emotion. "There are parts of this story you do not understand." "Then help me understand," I said. My mother looked at me for a very long time. It seemed as though she was fighting an internal battle. Finally, she stood and walked toward the house. Before disappearing through the door, she stopped and turned back toward me. "If you continue looking for answers," she said softly, "your life may never look the same again." Then she walked away, leaving me alone with a name, a photograph, and a warning I could no longer ignore. My mother's warning should have convinced me to stop. Instead, it had the opposite effect. The more she tried to protect the past, the more certain I became that the past contained something important. For several days, I wrestled with what to do next. Part of me felt guilty. Eleanor Brooks had spent her entire life caring for our family. She deserved privacy. Yet another part of me could not ignore the growing sense that the answers were connected to something much larger than an old ring or a forgotten photograph. Eventually, curiosity won. The following weekend, I returned to my mother's house while she attended a church luncheon. This time, I knew exactly what I was looking for. The photo album. After a few minutes of searching, I found it hidden in a different location than before. My mother had clearly moved it. That alone told me she was worried about what it contained. I carried the album into the dining room and began examining every page carefully. Most photographs were familiar. Family gatherings, neighborhood events, holidays. Then I noticed something I had overlooked earlier. Emily Carter did not simply appear beside my mother. She appeared beside my father as well. In several photographs, the three of them stood together smiling. They looked unusually close. Not casual friends. More like family. I continued turning pages. Near the back of the album, a folded piece of paper slipped free and landed on the table. My heart immediately began racing. It was an old newspaper clipping. The date matched the year engraved inside the ring. The article itself was small, covering a local charity fundraiser in Columbus. Several attendees were photographed during the event. One of them was Emily Carter. I stared at the image for several moments. Then I noticed something else. Beside Emily stood my father. The caption identified both of them by name. Suddenly, Emily was no longer just a mysterious figure from family photographs. She was someone publicly connected to my parents during an important period of their lives. Beneath the clipping, another item had been tucked between the pages. This one was even more surprising. It was a hospital visitor badge. The paper had yellowed with age, but the writing remained visible. Visitor name, Emily Carter. Department, maternity ward. The date immediately caught my attention. It matched the month and year of my birth. For a moment, I simply stared at the badge. A maternity ward. The month I was born. Emily Carter. Questions exploded inside my mind. Why would Emily be visiting a maternity ward when I was born? Why had my mother kept this hidden for decades? Most importantly, why did the date connect directly to me? Before I could think further, another discovery appeared. Tucked into the back cover of the album was a photograph unlike any of the others. It showed my mother sitting in a hospital room. She looked exhausted but happy. Beside her stood my father. And standing on the opposite side of the bed was Emily Carter. The three adults were smiling down at something wrapped in a blanket. A newborn baby. My pulse pounded in my ears. I turned the photograph over. On the back, someone had written a short message. "Welcome to the world, little Ryan. Love always." The handwriting belonged to Emily Carter. I could hardly breathe. The room seemed to shrink around me. Every discovery was pointing toward the same conclusion, yet I could not bring myself to fully accept it. At that exact moment, I heard a car door slam outside. My mother had returned home. Quickly, I gathered the items and placed them back into the album. A few moments later, she entered the house. The instant she saw the album on the dining room table, her face fell. Neither of us spoke. We simply stared at one another across the room. Finally, I broke the silence. "Mom," I said quietly, "who was Emily Carter to me?" The question hung in the air between us. My mother closed her eyes. For several seconds, she said nothing at all. Then a tear slipped down her cheek. When she finally looked at me again, I knew the answer she had carried for 35 years was about to change both of our lives forever. The tear on my mother's cheek frightened me more than any answer she could have given. Throughout my entire life, Eleanor Brooks had been the strongest person I knew. She handled loss with dignity. She faced hardship with determination. Yet now she looked completely vulnerable. Slowly, she sat down at the dining room table. The old photo album remained open between us. The photograph of the newborn baby seemed to stare back from another lifetime. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, my mother took a deep breath. "Emily Carter was my best friend," she said quietly. The answer surprised me, but it explained very little. "Just your friend?" I asked. My mother's eyes drifted toward the photograph. "Much more than that. She was like a sister to me." I listened carefully as she began describing a chapter of her life I had never heard before. According to my mother, she met Emily shortly after graduating from college. They became inseparable almost immediately. They worked together, attended church together, and spent countless weekends helping one another through the challenges of early adulthood. When my parents married, Emily stood beside my mother during the ceremony. She was present for nearly every important milestone during those years. Looking at the photographs again, I could see the truth in my mother's words. Emily was not a distant acquaintance. She had been deeply woven into the fabric of our family. Then why have I never heard her name? I asked. My mother lowered her gaze. Because after a certain point, talking about Emily became too painful. Her voice trembled slightly. The sadness in her expression deepened. For the next hour, she shared pieces of a story that felt increasingly incomplete. Emily eventually moved away from Columbus. Contact became less frequent. Life became busy. Years passed. Yet even as she spoke, I sensed she was carefully avoiding something. The most important question remained unanswered. What did Emily have to do with me? Finally, I asked directly, why was she in the hospital when I was born? My mother immediately fell silent. The change was impossible to miss. She looked down at her hands and slowly folded them together. "Ryan," she said softly, "some truths affect more than one person." The answer only increased my frustration. "I am 35 years old," I replied. "If this concerns me, I deserve to know." My mother nodded slowly. For a moment, I thought she was finally ready to explain everything. Instead, she stood and walked toward a cabinet near the living room. After searching briefly, she returned carrying a large envelope. The paper looked old and fragile. She placed it carefully on the table. "Your father wanted you to have this someday," she said. My heart immediately began pounding. "What is it?" She hesitated. "A letter." The envelope had never been opened. My father's handwriting appeared clearly across the front. It simply read, "For Ryan." I stared at it in disbelief. My father had passed away 6 years earlier. Somehow, he had written this letter long before his death. My mother watched silently as I opened it. Inside were several pages folded neatly together. There was also a photograph. The photograph showed Emily Carter holding a baby. The baby was me. My hands began shaking. Beneath the photograph was a handwritten note from my father. The first sentence immediately changed everything. "Ryan, if you are reading this, then the time has finally come for you to learn where your story truly began." I stopped reading. My chest tightened. Across the table, my mother wiped another tear from her face. Suddenly, every strange reaction, every hidden photograph, every warning began making sense. The answers I had been searching for were no longer buried in attics or forgotten boxes. They were sitting directly in front of me. And judging by the look in my mother's eyes, the truth contained inside that letter was about to challenge everything I believed about my place in the Brooks family. My hands trembled as I continued reading my father's letter. Every instinct told me to stop. Part of me feared that whatever came next would permanently divide my life into 2 separate chapters. One chapter before the truth, another after it. Across the table, my mother remained silent. She was allowing the letter to speak first. Slowly, I returned my attention to the page. My father's words were careful and deliberate. It was obvious he had spent considerable time deciding how to tell a story that had remained hidden for decades. According to the letter, Emily Carter had faced an unimaginable crisis shortly before I was born. She was alone, overwhelmed, frightened about the future. My parents stood beside her through every difficult moment. They helped her find medical care. They supported her emotionally. They promised they would never abandon her. As I continued reading, one sentence immediately captured my attention. Emily loved you before you were born and made every decision believing it would give you the best possible future. My chest tightened. Suddenly, the direction of the story became impossible to ignore. I looked up at my mother. Tears filled her eyes. She gave a small nod, silently encouraging me to continue. Several paragraphs later, the truth finally appeared. The words were simple. There was no dramatic language, no attempt to soften their impact. Ryan, Emily Carter was your biological mother. The room seemed to disappear around me. For several moments, I could not move. I simply stared at the page. Every sound faded into the background. Every memory from my childhood seemed to rush forward at once. Birthdays, holidays, family vacations, school events. Through all of it, I had always believed I understood where I came from. Now, in a single sentence, everything had changed. My father explained that shortly after my birth, Emily experienced serious health challenges and difficult circumstances that made raising a child alone impossible. She loved me deeply but feared she could not provide the stability I deserved. After many emotional conversations, she asked my parents to raise me as their own. The decision was made privately, with compassion and mutual agreement. According to my father, everyone involved believed they were acting in my best interest. My eyes moved quickly across the remaining pages. Emily did not disappear immediately. For the first several years of my life, she remained close to the family. That explained the photographs, the birthday parties, the hospital pictures, the reason she appeared everywhere during my earliest years. Then another revelation emerged. Emily passed away when I was very young. I had no memory of her because I was barely old enough to form lasting recollections. My parents believed that telling me the truth too early would create confusion and pain. As time passed, delaying the conversation became easier. Then years became decades. Eventually, the secret became part of the foundation of our family. By the time my father wrote the letter, he understood that keeping it hidden forever was no longer fair. He wanted me to know the truth someday. He wanted me to understand that I had always been loved by more people than I realized. When I finally reached the end, I carefully folded the pages and placed them back on the table. The silence that followed felt enormous. My mother reached for my hand. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. I looked at her and saw the weight she had carried for 35 years. Every birthday, every family photograph, every moment, she almost told me the truth, but could not find the words. "Why did you wait so long?" I asked softly. A tear rolled down her cheek. "Because every year it became harder." Her answer contained no defensiveness, only regret. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then another question entered my mind, one that had not been answered by the letter. If Emily Carter was my biological mother, then who was my biological father? Slowly, I looked down at the photograph again. Something suddenly caught my attention. Standing beside Emily in the background was a man I had never seen before. On the back of the photograph, written in faint fading ink, was a name. And the moment I read it, I realized the story was not over. In many ways, it was only beginning. For several minutes, I could not stop staring at the faded name written on the back of the photograph. The handwriting was weak from age, but still readable. Daniel Mercer. I repeated the name silently. It meant nothing to me, yet somehow I knew it was important. My mother followed my gaze and immediately recognized what had captured my attention. Her expression changed again. Not fear this time, more like resignation. "You found his name," she said quietly. I looked up. Who was Daniel Mercer? My mother remained silent for a long moment before answering. "He was Emily's fiancé." The answer surprised me. I glanced back at the photograph. The man standing beside Emily looked young and confident. There was warmth in the way they stood together. "Was he my father?" I asked. My mother lowered her eyes. "Yes." Hearing the words spoken aloud created a strange feeling inside me. For 35 years, I had never questioned who my father was. I had always known Robert Brooks as my father because he was my father in every way that mattered. He taught me how to ride a bicycle. He helped me with school projects. He attended my baseball games. He stood beside me through every important milestone. Yet now I was learning that another man had existed at the beginning of my story. A man whose face I had never seen before that week. What happened to him? I asked. My mother slowly leaned back in her chair. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the dining room window, casting long shadows across the table. Daniel died before you were born. The answer stunned me. Suddenly pieces of the puzzle began fitting together. Emily alone. The difficult circumstances. My parents stepping in to help. Everything became easier to understand. My mother explained that Daniel and Emily had planned to build a life together. They had dreams, plans, and hopes for the future. Then an unexpected tragedy changed everything. Daniel passed away only months before my birth. Emily was devastated. The emotional and financial challenges that followed became overwhelming. My parents did everything they could to support her. As my mother spoke, I found myself studying the photograph more closely. For the first time, I noticed similarities between Daniel and myself. The shape of his jaw, the color of his eyes, even his smile felt strangely familiar. It was unsettling and comforting at the same time. Did he know about me? I asked softly. My mother's eyes filled with tears again. Yes, he was excited to become a father. The room fell silent. I imagined a man I had never met looking forward to a future he would never see. A future that included me. The thought was difficult to process. After several moments, my mother stood and walked toward the living room. She returned carrying a small leather folder. Carefully, she placed it in front of me. Emily gave this to your father before she passed away, she said. Inside were photographs, letters, and a few personal keepsakes. One item immediately caught my attention. It was a letter addressed directly to me. Unlike my father's letter, this one had been written by Emily herself. My hands trembled as I unfolded the pages. The first lines brought tears to my eyes almost immediately. She wrote about love. Not loss. Not regret. Love. She described how much she wanted me to know that every decision she made came from love. She thanked Eleanor and Robert for giving me a stable and happy life. She expressed hope that someday I would understand why the truth had been hidden. As I continued reading, something unexpected happened. The anger I thought I might feel never arrived. Instead, I felt surrounded by the love of people who had sacrificed for me in different ways. My biological mother. My biological father. The parents who raised me. For the first time since discovering the secret, I began to see the entire story from a different perspective. Yet one question still remained. At the bottom of Emily's letter, she referenced a final gift that had been saved for me. A gift connected to Daniel. A gift she hoped I would receive when the truth was finally revealed. I looked up at my mother. She already knew what I was about to ask. Slowly, she reached into her pocket and placed the old gold ring on the table between us. The old gold ring rested silently on the table between us. For days, it had been the center of every question. Now, at last, I understood why. My mother carefully picked it up and turned it toward the afternoon light. The worn surface reflected decades of history. Daniel bought this ring 6 months before he died, she said softly. He planned to give it to Emily after your birth. They wanted to marry and start their family together. I listened without speaking. The ring no longer felt like a mysterious object. It felt like a bridge connecting lives that had been separated by time. My mother placed it in my hand. Emily kept it after Daniel passed away, she continued. She carried it everywhere. When she realized she might not have many years left, she gave it to your father and asked him to save it for you. My fingers closed around the ring. For a moment, emotion overwhelmed me. This small piece of gold had survived longer than the people who first treasured it. Somehow, it had found its way back to me. My mother opened the leather folder again and removed another photograph. This one showed Emily and Daniel standing together in a park. The sunlight illuminated their faces. They looked happy, hopeful, young. Looking at them, I realized something important. For years, I had imagined this revelation would make me feel lost. Instead, it made me feel connected. Connected to people whose love had shaped my life even before I could remember them. There is one more thing you need to know, my mother said. Her voice was calm now. The fear that had haunted her since the birthday dinner seemed to be fading. She reached into the folder and pulled out a folded document. It was a legal statement signed decades earlier. As I read it, everything became clear. Emily had never abandoned me. She had never disappeared because she did not care. Every decision had been documented. Every choice had been made with careful thought and tremendous love. She had specifically chosen Eleanor and Robert Brooks because she trusted them completely. She believed they would give me opportunities she could no longer guarantee. Tears filled my eyes as I continued reading. The document contained a handwritten note from Emily at the bottom. It was only a few sentences long. She wrote that family is not defined only by biology. Family is defined by sacrifice, commitment, and love shown every day. She hoped I would never doubt how deeply I was loved by everyone involved in the decision. When I finished reading, I finally understood why my parents had struggled to tell me the truth. They had been protecting more than a secret. They had been protecting a promise made between friends who loved the same child. My mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I was afraid you would hate me," she whispered. The sadness in her voice broke my heart. "Never," I replied immediately. "I wish I had known sooner. But I could never hate you." Fresh tears appeared in her eyes. For the first time since this journey began, she smiled. It was not a smile of relief alone. It was the smile of someone finally setting down a burden carried for 35 years. We spent the rest of the afternoon looking through photographs together. She told me stories about Emily and Daniel that had never been shared before. Stories about their dreams, their kindness, their hopes for the future. With every story, they became more real to me. Not replacements for the family I knew. Additions to it. As evening approached, I slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. My mother noticed and smiled again. Outside, the sun began to set over Columbus. Inside the house, the silence felt peaceful rather than painful. The mystery that had started with a forgotten box in the attic was finally revealing its true meaning. The ring had not simply uncovered my past. It had revealed that my life had been built upon an extraordinary act of love from people who wanted nothing more than for me to be happy. Several weeks passed after the truth came to light, yet I found myself thinking about it every day, not because it had shattered my life, but because it had quietly reshaped the way I understood it. For 35 years, I had viewed my story through a single lens. Now I could see the entire picture. I could see Emily Carter and Daniel Mercer. I could see the sacrifices they made. I could see the difficult decisions my parents faced. Most importantly, I could finally see how deeply I had been loved from the very beginning. As autumn settled across Ohio, our family gathered once again at my mother's house. This time, the occasion was much simpler. No milestone birthday. No special celebration. Just a Sunday afternoon meal with family. Yet somehow it felt more meaningful than any gathering I could remember. Claire arrived early with her children. Matthew brought homemade desserts. The house filled with familiar voices and laughter. Looking around the dining room, I realized nothing had changed and everything had changed at the same time. The walls were the same. The furniture was the same. The family was the same. Yet there were no more hidden questions hanging in the air. No more secrets locked away in attics. No more unopened letters waiting for the right moment. Before dinner, my mother asked everyone to join her in the living room. She stood beside the fireplace holding one of the old photo albums. Her hands no longer trembled when she opened it. Instead, she looked peaceful. One by one, she shared photographs and stories that had remained hidden for decades. She spoke about Emily. She spoke about Daniel. She spoke about friendship, loyalty, loss, and hope. For the first time, the entire family learned the complete story. There were tears. There were moments of silence. There were also smiles. Because the story was not really about loss. It was about love enduring through time. Afterward, Claire hugged me tightly. Matthew shook my hand before pulling me into an embrace. Neither of them treated me differently. Neither of them questioned whether I belonged. In their eyes, I was still their brother. I always would be. Later that evening, after everyone gathered around the dinner table, I noticed my mother watching the family. Quietly, there was relief in her expression. The burden she had carried for so many years was finally gone. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. She smiled. No words were necessary. We both understood what that moment meant. As the evening continued, stories flowed freely. Children laughed. Old memories resurfaced. New memories were created. At one point, my niece asked about the ring I wore on my finger. I looked down at the gold band and smiled. It belonged to someone important, I told her. That answer felt right. Because the ring now represented more than one person. It represented every life connected to mine. Every sacrifice. Every act of kindness. Every choice made out of love. As the sun began setting beyond the backyard, I stepped outside for a few minutes alone. The cool autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves. Through the window, I could see my family gathered around the table. My family. Not because of shared genetics alone. Not because of legal documents or family trees. Because family is built through love shown day after day across a lifetime. Standing there, I realized something that had taken 35 years to understand. Discovering where I came from had not changed who I was. It had simply revealed how many people helped shape the person I became. Emily gave me life. Daniel gave me a legacy. Eleanor and Robert gave me a home. Together, they gave me a future. And in that moment, as laughter drifted from the house behind me, I felt grateful for every part of the story, even the painful parts, because without them, I never would have discovered the truth that mattered most. I had never been abandoned. I had never been forgotten. I had been loved from the very beginning, and that love, preserved through letters, photographs, memories, and one old gold ring, would remain part of my family for generations to come.